Hi everyone, my name is Joey San. So today I'm going to discuss about a topic on decoupling. The reason why I want to go through this topic is because upcoming there will be a lot of new launches, right? So new launches usually for developers, like they will not be able to have conditions in their sale. So if let's say you are looking to buy one of the new launches, and you still have a property on hand, then you will be liable to pay an ABSD, additional buyer stamp duty. Decoupling is actually a way to save on ABSD legally in Singapore. Okay, let's take a look at how it works. Decoupling refers to the process where one co-owner of a property transfers their share to the other, effectively removing them from the property ownership. So husband and wife, they own a property together, and then under their property count, both will be one each. The husband transfer the share over to the wife, right? So the wife property count will still be 1 because it's still under the same property address. Then the husband's property count will become 0. So this is like legally resetting your property count, okay? So the wife become a sole owner of the property, and then with the 0 property count for the husband, he's able to buy another property without ABSD. So they do not need to incur ABSD and potentially saving them a significant amount of money. And why would you want to do decoupling? So this is one of the strategies that people use in the real estate market, and it's a very popular strategy that could save you hundreds of thousands in ABSD. This strategy is usually used by married couples aiming to expand their property portfolio. So take a look at this. This is actually our Singapore ABSD rates, right? For a Singapore citizen, right, Singapore citizen first property, you don't need to pay an ABSD, but for a second property, you will need to pay a 20% additional buyer stamp duty. Meaning to say this is not your buyer stamp duty in total, this is just the additional buyer stamp duty you still need to plus your buyer stamp duty. Alright, third property onwards, your ABSD will be 30% for Singaporean. Okay, PR will be 5% on first property, second property 30%, and the third property onwards will be 35%. Decoupling can be part of a broader investment strategy, allowing couples, right, to acquire multiple properties without incurring the full burden of ABSD. This can be beneficial for long-term wealth accumulation and diversification. What are the property types that can be decoupled? So we can do decoupling for private properties, condominium, apartments, EC and landed. For EC, you will need to wait for 5 years MOP before you can do decoupling, alright? For HDB, you will not be able to do decoupling. Many years ago, before 2016, right, April, we used to be able to do decoupling for HDB. After that, the government actually stopped this. So after 2016, which is now, you won't be able to do decoupling for HDB already. Let's take a look at this case study on why people will do decoupling and the concept of it, okay? So for example, this Mr. and Mrs. Tan, both Singapore citizens, co-own a 2 million condo. So they want to buy a second condo for investment. Property price of 2 million, the ABSD will be 2 million times 20%, which is 400,000. So ABSD is additional buyer stamp duty. So it's not inclusive of buyer stamp duty. So let's say if you compare with your neighbors buying at the same price, 2 million, but they don't have ABSD, that means you're paying a 400,000 more in tax compared with your neighbors. So this is actually a case study with decoupling. This one a little bit more complicated, so let me explain on this. With decoupling, Mr. and Mrs. Tan, we use back the same scenario, okay? So Mr. and Mrs. Tan both SC co-own 2 million condo. They want to buy a second property for investment. So let's say the outstanding loan will be 650,000. The CPF use plus accrued interest is 300,000. Loan eligibility 1.25 million, and the CPF OA is 100,000. So because decoupling is like you sell your share to someone, and the other part is you buy the share from another person, but this is within the same property, but the process is actually the same. So let's take a look at this buying process. In this case, Mr. Tan will stay, and then that means they will buy over the share from the wife. 75% loan of 1 million. So how do we get 1 million, right? It's actually half of 2 million condo. So 2 million, we just assume that is the valuation of the property, and they co-own 50-50 tenancy in common, okay, 50% shares. 75% loan of 1 million will be 750,000. 25% cash plus CPF, total will be 250,000. Mandatory 5% must be in cash. Buyer stamp duty based on this 1 million purchase, right, will be 24,600. So we minus what this Mr. Tan have in the current CPF OA. The cash to be paid will be 174,600. On top of that, right, we will also need to see what is the TDSR of this Mr. Tan, because the 75% of this 1 million share is 750,000. 50% of the existing loan, which is what they have over here, 50%, because they only own 50% shares, 750,000 plus 325,000. So the new loan will be 1.075 million. Now let's take a look at the selling process of Mr. Tan. Mr. Tan will sell 1 million worth of shares, because 50% of 2 million, 1 million worth of shares minus the 50% of existing housing loan, which is 325,000, and minus the CPF plus accrued interest used in this property is 300,000. It will be 375 in sales proceed. Okay, so 375 in sales proceed is the money that you get back through this decoupling, but you need to minus your 174,000 because you need to offset. So minus this 174,000, and legal fee will be approximately 6,000, because buy will be 3,000, sell will be 3,000. So add up, the whole process will cost about 6,000. Your cash on hand after doing this decoupling will be 195,000. So 195,000, you can use this amount to actually go and buy your next property, to fund for your next property. Okay, the difference between additional buyer stamp duty for a second property, 400,000, the cost of decoupling is actually just the buyer stamp duty and also the legal fee. So buyer stamp duty plus legal fee, and the financing fee is depend on whether do you have a lock-in period with the bank. Total, let's say about 40,000. Alright, so 400,000 minus 40,000 is 360,000. So the estimated savings, right, is 360,000. If this additional buyer stamp duty is more than the cost of decoupling, then we will do decoupling. Of course, this is a very simple calculation. So this is actually more of the concept that I want you to know, right? So over here, there's another case study example whereby there are people who are within the property, they are holding 99% versus 1% shares like this, because they already plan to exit from their property later on. But there are some things that you need to note if you are using this method. Okay, so for example, we use back the same scenario, right? This time with decoupling, but the tenancy in common, right, we change to 99.1. Same 2 million condo, they want to buy a second property, outstanding loan and accrued interest are the same, loan eligibility are the same, CPF OA is same. Alright, so buying process becomes 1% of 2 million, which is 20,000. Alright, 25% cash plus CPF will be 5,000. Alright, and then BSD, which is the buyer stamp duty, will be $200. So the total amount that this Mr. Tan needs to pay is 20,200. So it's easy for Mr. Tan to exit, okay, to buy over, right? So you can just pay this 20,200 without having to take a loan. So just pay in full cash. So let's look at the selling portion over here. So Mrs. Tan, right, 20,000 worth of shares, right, minus 1% of the existing housing loan, which is 6,500. So minus the CPF plus accrued interest will be 300,000. Cash proceed will becomes a negative 286,500. 286,500, you minus the 20,000 that you have already paid, right, from this Mr. Tan. And then you still need to pay legal fee of 6,000, right? So the total obligation is about 300,000. In this case, right, then we assess whether is it still worth to do so. One thing about this is that this CPF plus accrued interest, right, you need to return back in cash. You cannot pay using your CPF because you are only buying 1% of the share. Okay, so you need to pay back this in cash to Mr. Tan's CPF. So after this calculation like this, right, my suggestion is that the 1% owner, try not to use so much CPF, or you try not to touch your CPF. If not, right, if you're thinking of using more of your CPF, you can also do it in an 80-20 percentage or 90-10 tenancy in common if you want to use your CPF lah. So but if you want to exit easier without paying much more, then you don't use your CPF, then the cost will be much lower. So there are many considerations to understand before you even decide whether do you want to do decoupling or not. So decoupling is not for everyone. You need to see the pros and cons. So manner of holding, right, is just now the one that I mentioned, 99-1 or maybe 80-20 or 90-10. Alright. Outstanding loan amount, if the outstanding loan amount is a very big amount, we may not be able to get back a lot of cash. So that we will need to do a calculation on that. So valuation of the property needs to see what is the valuation of the property before we can see we can cash out some money from here. CPF use plus accrued interest. This is important because it depends on your manner of holding, and then it will depend on how much CPF that you can use. Seller stamp duty. Okay, seller stamp duty, if let's say you acquired your property within 3 years, right, the selling part will have SSD based on the shares that you sell. So if let's say you bought this together within 3 years, then you want to sell, this 1% or maybe 10% shares will tax SSD depending on the year that you sell. For this loan redemption penalty, it depends on the bank loan. So you need to check with the bank whether do you have any lock-in period over here. Remaining owner TDSR must qualify in full loan. Okay, so it depends on whether the remaining party will be able to get a full loan for this property. Otherwise, you need to pay more in cash. And it defeats the purpose of this already. Timeline calculation. So timeline calculation is also something which you need to be more careful about. The whole timeline for decoupling usually takes about 10 to 12 weeks, depending on if you have any outstanding loan or if you have CPF used for this property to complete the whole process of decoupling. But buying the next property, as long as your exercise date of your decoupling is earlier than your exercise date of your new property, then no ABSD is payable already. Okay? The citizenship of the party is also very important because we need to decide who will be the one staying and who will be the one to exit. So let's say if it's a SPR and a SC, likely the SPR will stay because SPR, if you exit, right, you go and buy the next property, you will still have a 5% ABSD on your first property. So there are a lot of things to consider over here. Thinking of decoupling or planning your second property, DM me for a personalized breakdown. I'll run the numbers with you and see if this works for your situation. When we build wealth through property, we are not investing in properties. We are investing in better lives. Alright? Thank you and see you in my next video.